Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. Want to improve your organization's customer service? Looking for insider tips to knock your customer socks off? Then you're in the right place. Here's your host, Yannick Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, our guest is Jean-Pierre LaCroix. Jean-Pierre is the President and Chief Strategic Officer of SLD. He is a seasoned strategic thinker who has led numerous strategies on personifying brands through immersive design, with more than 35 years of experience in the development and implementation of retail transformation programs, including groundbreaking transformation tools that he has developed, such as the Trust Ladder and Ideal Omni Experience Model, and he'll provide us with an in-depth knowledge to those projects. Jean-Pierre has over 46 years of experience. SLD was founded in 1990, and he's worked with organizations such as New Skin, Tip Top, RBC Bank, TD Bank, Trust Canada, Jackson Hewitt Regions Bank, M&M Food Market, Toronto Blue Jays, just to name a few. When he's not at work, Jean-Pierre is an avid reader of nonfiction and has also published several books of his own, one of which we'll be discussing today. So sit back, plug your earphones in, and let's jump right into this conversation with Jean-Pierre. Welcome, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Yannick. Thank you for the opportunity of sharing some insights with your listeners, and this will be fun.
Awesome. So we always like to give our guests an opportunity to share a little bit about their journey, how you got from where you were to where you are today. In your own words, even though we've read your bio, we like to hear in the guests' own words a bit about their journey. So could you share a little bit with us?
Yes, Yannick, my life started in Germany. My father was in the Air Force, so I grew up on an Air Force base in Germany at Lars and Baden-Baden. Those are two cities. And then we came back to Canada when I was 7. And my father is a serial entrepreneur, so he got into selling televisions just when televisions were taking off, and appliances. And when he sold that business, he got into farming, gardening to be specific. And so I grew up being a gardener for about half my life. And I decided that getting up at 5 in the morning to work the fields and going to bed at 10 o'clock when the sun went down was really not something I wanted to do. And so I went to Sheridan College in Toronto and got a degree in graphic design and graduated in 1978. And within 2 years, I started my own company. My first company was called Boulevard Communication, and we became one of Canada's largest marketing design firms and one of the largest also in North America. And then that didn't last long, about 10 years. It was like the Beatles split up. We had too many egos in under the same house. And I started Chicoutimi LaCroix with one of the junior partners, Ed Chicoutimi. And then I bought him out 10 years in the making of the company, SLD. And so I've been running this company now for 36 years, of which I was sole proprietary for 26.
Awesome. That is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, you are also an author, and your book is right up there on the screen with you. Could you share a little bit about your book that you published, ThinkBlink Manifesto? What is it about? Why did you write it? What inspired you? Who is it geared towards? And how can it help the persons that you wrote it for?
The book was written last year. This is my third book. My self-published book's my third one. The first book was Belonging Experiences, which is really the doorway to aspiring is to have a sense of community. And today that's even more important, and it now forms part of the chapter in the ThinkBlink book. My second book was called Desire by Design. And if you go on Amazon, don't get confused with the one that's about it's about branding. And then I wrote this book because we coined the phrase the blink factor in 1993, working on a project with Pizza Hut. And then in 1996, we registered it in North America, the blink factor. And we wanted to take the model that we've over the years been creating. You talked about the Trust Ladder and the Omni Experience model. Take these tools that we created, helping organizations manage their transformation, and put in a book so that future generations, our employees, our clients, and future clients can understand how we do things and what makes our company unique and our processes unique. But more importantly, the reason I wrote this book is I've been seeing over the years this fixation, and AI is going to make it even worse, this fixation on functional attributes. Everything's about features and benefits or promotions and price discounts, when really the consumer doesn't buy that way. They buy through their hearts. And the best way to get to the customer's pocketbook, I always say, is through their heart. And their heart is about emotional connections. And how do you deliver and connect emotionally with your audience? It's about these 7 tenets that we've outlined in the book. And each tenet builds on each other to form this ecosystem of building these emotionally engaged brands. And that was the nucleus of why I wrote the book. I was tired having discussions in meetings going, okay, that's great. These are all the features. But what is the key feeling you want to create with your product? And stare, look, what do you mean feeling? Yeah, when the consumer consumes your product or uses your product or drives your product, what kind of a feeling do you want to generate? Because the leading brands own a feeling, like Volvo owns safety, Staple owns easy, TD owns comfort. What is that one emotive word that you want to own as a brand? And most companies struggle with that. They'll have a list, they call them values or personalities, but that's not the emotional connection that we're looking for. And so that's what drove me to write the book and to have it published and to have meetings like you so that we can start this shift of narrative from the transactional to the emotional, from the functional to the emotive.
Beautiful. And if you were to share with us those 7 tenets that the book permeates, what would those tenets be?
Well, it starts, the first tenet is the foundation of everything. The first tenet is, what is that emotional equity you own or equities you own? What is it that, you connect emotionally with your audience that's relevant to them? And how's that emotion differentiate from your competitions? And how can you amplify that through all your communication touch points? So the first one is own that emotional moment. How do you make your customers feel? What are those equities that are unique to you, that are relevant to your audience?
Right.
Tenet number 2 is building on that, is how do you translate that, we call personification of the value, the emotional value proposition? How do you translate that into design? And design isn't just aesthetics. Design is, what's the journey? What is the interaction? What are the friction points we need to eliminate? Because we know that you can't get emotionally connected with your audience if the journey they're undertaking to connect with you is full of problems, full of friction points, full of frustrations, right? How do you say, are you having a beautiful day? No, I'm having a terrible day, because your experience is terrible. Well, how do you then overcome that and connect emotionally? So design plays a really critical tool. Design thinking, solving through design. The third tenet is about communicating a story. So how do you take that value and humanize that story? Because as human beings, we've learned through storytelling, from the day of the Stone Age, human mankind have learned and educated themselves through storytelling. And so what is the brand story you want to instill towards your employees and your customers that link to tenet number 1? Tenet number 4 is really understanding who are your key target group. Now that you've done the story, who are you appealing to? And it's got to go beyond demographics and psychographics. What's their lifestyle? What do they do every day? How do they interact with different retailers or different brands? What's their attitude? How are they feeling? And how do you map that into what we call personas, right? So that's tenet number 4. Tenet number 5, which was my first book that I wrote, creating belonging experiences, because we know that we're creatures of habit. We're also creatures of communities. We strive. We're part of the communities. And it's so funny. I think the word of the year this year will be belonging. And no matter where I go, I'm reading, our brand needs to have a sense of belonging. Our employees need to have a sense of community and belonging. And that's really important because with, the level of anxiety we have today, which is right off the Richter scale, we just did a study on loneliness. It's become now a serious health issue in North America. People you think social media and technology would make us more connected. They've actually isolated us more. And so that is belonging. That's tenet number 5. Tenet number 6 is measuring what matters. And so, most organizations measure functional things, customer satisfaction, product acceptance, sales, frequency of visits, depth of wallet, all these great mathematical and functional left brain thinking metrics. And they're important. Don't get me wrong. They're the foundation. But what we learned is they're not the ones that differentiate you. They're the ones that allow you to stay in business, but they're not the ones that are going to drive growth. The ones that drive growth are emotional equities. How did you make them feel? How does your brand align to their lifestyle? How do they feel fulfilled using your product? All of these key metrics that historically were hard to track, but with AI and digital technology now, your phone now is a sentiment computer. It judges your sentiments. You don't know, but it is. It judges the sentiment in your voice, and banks now are using that technology on their phone service, your customer service lines to understand what's the sentiment of the person writing or calling in, and how do we understand how to mitigate that level of anxiety. And the last tenet is future-proofing. So most organizations are judged quarterly, and there was a big controversy that the company shouldn't be evaluated. They shouldn't be tracking quarterly. They should be tracking annually. I'll put that aside. The reality is that organizations need to future-proof their brand. They need to look at what are the different scenarios of disruption that we need to mitigate. We as a company predicted the pandemic 18 months before it happened, right? We were ready. We were already doing remote work and remote servers before it even happened. But how do you future-proof your brand against these disruptions? What about if there's a war? What about if there's another pandemic, which is going to happen? So what are the strategies companies, like there's a shortage now of minerals and all kinds of, like, how are you going to mitigate these issues? And that's a tenet number 7, which is future-proofing your brand. So they all come together.
They all come together, create a ThinkBlink Manifesto. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Jean-Pierre. Now, Jean-Pierre, you work with a lot of different brands, and leadership is very important in an organization. As we close out 2025 and we embark on a new year, what are maybe 2 or 3 overarching tenets that you believe a leader needs to have to embrace the kind of mindset that you would need to even focus on a lot of the things that you talk about in your book, the ThinkBlink Manifesto? I think the concepts are brilliant, but I just don't feel like all leaders in organizations are there, especially that last part where you spoke about future-proofing your business. Some people are still operating with the mindset pre-COVID,
Yeah.
they're not even post-COVID yet, so how do you even get them to even think that level of disruption? Because it will come, as you said, and we have to kind of be in that space to embrace it.
Yes. So the first thing they can do is come tomorrow. They're going to be able to go to our website, and we have launched an AI, ThinkBlink AI assessment tool. It allows companies to assess we have proprietary data. We've been doing research on this subject for the last 10 years across North America and actually globally. We have a database of proprietary research plus proprietary evaluations based on the tenet factors, the 7 tenets. Plus, we have access through this platform to search the world for things like annual reports, NPS scores, employee satisfaction levels, media, social media, all of these factors that give you a holistic view of the company. And it ranks the company versus one of its competitors on the 7 tenet scores. And it gives you not only how you rank and why you rank that way, but it gives you recipe and strategies to fill those gaps that you're missing. So that'd be the first thing that I would think, understanding where are we in connecting emotionally with our audience. Do we have the right metrics in place? Have we future-proofed our brand? And so having this assessment really opens the eyes to organizations and how they're viewed versus their competition. Number 1. I think number 2 is most organizations now, because COVID's accelerated this, are really focusing on a sense of belonging for the employees. So employee empowerment. We just finished a couple of major programs for a petroleum company and an insurance company. It's really understanding how do we create a sense of belonging, because we're asking, our employees to come back to work. We're disrupting their lifestyles. There's a lot of challenges, from a standpoint of economy, salaries, cost of living, the ability of owning a house. All these factors come to play in impacting how employees engage with their customers, but also how they engage with their other employees. And so I would say organizations need to go deep into the sense of belonging would be the tenet that I would say start there. If you haven't done the emotional one, at least build a bridge by focusing on the sense of belonging, creating a strong sense of community within your company, but also creating a sense of community and engagement, a two-way communication with your customers. Because we have learned, we did this big study for the food service industry, and what we found out is this, that the brands that are leading the industry are brands that have a strong sense of community. And 57% of consumers we studied in North America indicated that they're more loyal to an organization that demonstrates a commitment to the community. And not only the community from a standpoint of customers and neighborhoods, but community of employees, to how they treat their employees. And so I would start there. So that'd be point number 2. And point number 3, what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So I'd say, go look at your metrics. The assessment tool is going to open up some new ways of looking at how you measure things. Go back and look at your metrics, because I know organizations, once they've instilled a new sense of metrics, it's going to shift their behavior. It's just a natural process that if you measure emotional equities of your brand, if you start measuring how your employees are feeling, if you start measuring the feeling your brand generates for your customers, it's going to force you to rethink your performance, rethink how you go to market. That's really important, because in our studies, there's a direct correlation between the performance of a company from an NPS score, sales, customer loyalty, and the Tenet scores. Companies who rank high on the Tenet scores outperform the industry by 2 to 1. And so they're leaders, and they're leaders in many facets, not just sales.
Amazing. All right. Based on your work that you've done with, your own clients or even organizations that you've done researches on, is there any company that you believe has mastered that? They've been able to connect the dots between those different points that you just mentioned?
There's the obvious, the Apples of the world. Everyone names Apple. I think they're a great example of an organization. But in Canada, I would say Cineplex. They're an innovator in the category. They create experiences for their guests. They're very much focused on their staff engagement and loyalty. The industry has gone through some significant peaks and valleys, and more peaks to come as people move from going to theaters to enjoying entertainment in their homes. I'd say Cineplex. They're truly an innovator in the category around the world, that people come to Canada to look at what they're doing. So I'd say Cineplex would be a great example.
Thank you.
Harley Davidson is another one. I don't own a motorbike, but they created a cult. And I think one of the key factors of belonging is if you can create a cult following for your brand, you've achieved the ultimate sense of belonging. I mean, so the question I would have to your audience, are your customers willing to put a tattoo on their body with your brand name? Are your employees willing to put a tattoo on their body? Yeah. And I was speaking at a restaurant conference in Palm Springs last week, and there was a local pizza chain president talking about, it was ampersand and pizza, which started in New York. And they're very much a community driven. They really, emulate the Blink Factor. But part of the onboarding for the employees is they're offered a free tattoo. So there you go.
Wow. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing, Jean-Pierre. Really rich conversation. Enjoying it thoroughly. Now, can you share with our listeners what's the one online resource, tool, website, or application that you absolutely can't live without in your business?
Well, for the audience, if you go to www.sld.com and you go under Insights and you scroll down to Resources, we have about 20 resources. These are how-to exercises. If you want to position your firm, want to define the value proposition, if you want to do a SWOT analysis or apply the trust ladder, all of these tools, or what's the right type of research you should do, they're all available there. We're sharing 35 years of experience of the things to do and the things not to do in the resource section. And so I would tell them, start there. But for me, I'm a ferocious reader. I read a book a week. The one, I'm fortunate. So, excuse me. So I'm French Canadian, and I grew up speaking French and only French. But I went to an English college or university, Sheridan. And what they did is they put me into the English immersion course to teach me English. Mm-hmm. And one of those courses, which was phenomenal, was speed reading. So, when I look at college and high school, the two courses that have benefited me even today is speed reading and typing. I learned how to type on a typewriter, so it makes it a lot easier to write a book. So yeah. I would say read, and it's sad. It is so sad. So few people read. When I interview an employee and I say, so where do you get your inspirations? Well, I go online, I look at, blogs and this and that. Do you read a book? No, I don't read books. So many people don't read books. So all that wealth of knowledge, not because I wrote a book, but all that wealth of knowledge that could elevate their careers and their experience and their knowledge, they're not leveraging. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah, agreed. All right. On the topic of reading, my next question is, I'm sure, as you mentioned before, you're a ferocious reader and you read at least a book a week, but is there any that have stood out for you? Maybe one that has had a really great impact on you. Could have been one you read a very long time ago, or even one that you've read recently.
Yeah, Blue Ocean. And then that book, to me, really changed the mindset of what is possible. And like my book, a process that companies can take to define their own blue ocean. And a blue ocean is like we also call it white space. Blue ocean is an area that your competitors are not, that you can own, that drives value and changes your entire business model for growth. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was a very inspirational book. And the other one was The Challenger Mindset. This is a book that talks about similar vein. How do you communicate? How do you bring insights to the marketplace? The reality is there's so much information now available online. Like I write a blog a day, so you can imagine the amount of content that's available. There's too much. And so how do you bring a fresh perspective? And that book really does a good. And then the book Nudge is a book on behavioral science. We have behavioral scientists on staff. How do we nudge? We're creatures of habit. How do we change our bad habits to good habits? How do we get consumers to look at this brand versus the other brand? It's all about nudging them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we'll have the links to those books in the show notes of this episode. All right, Jean-Pierre, could you share with our listeners what's the one thing that's going on in your life right now that you're really excited about? Either something you're working on to develop yourself or your people.
What I'm really excited about is I'm a grandfather. I've got a grandson, Marcus, who's 9 months old. Awesome. And, seeing the world through his eyes, brings back humanity, a sense of humanity, a sense of value and purpose and importance on being human. So, that would definitely top other topics. But I think the other one is I'm looking forward. I got invited to speak again at Financial Brands Forum in Las Vegas next year. It's the largest banking conference in the world. And it's like going to the Academy Awards. It's really an honor and a privilege to be invited to be a keynote speaker. So I'm looking forward to that. And it's all about wealth and the transfer of wealth between my generation and my daughter's generation.
Yeah, amazing. That's awesome. All right. Now, as we wrap our episodes up, Jean-Pierre, our listeners would have tapped into this episode and they're quite intrigued with your book, with your journey, with your organization, and they would like to connect with you. What's the easiest way that they can find you or connect with you online?
Just go to my LinkedIn profile and connect there. You can join my LinkedIn newsletter, which is ThinkBlink newsletter, where I blog every day on observations of how brands need to apply the emotional connection. Or you can go to my website, www.sld, that's samlovedog.com, and you can connect with me there. There's a connect form that you can fill out, and happy to follow up with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, before we close our episodes out, we always like to ask our guests, do you have a quote or a saying that during times of adversity or challenge, you'll tend to revert to this quote? If for any reason you get derailed or you get off track, the quote kind of helps to get you back on track. Do you have one of those?
I created one. You want to hear it?
Yep.
Yeah. Leadership is about seeing the opportunity in the challenges versus the challenges in the opportunity. How many times have we been faced with, oh, this is a great opportunity. Oh, but I can't do it. We'll have problems doing it this way. We'll have problems doing it that way. And maybe it won't happen. And people psych themselves out before really giving it a try. And leadership is about seeing the opportunities and the challenges, because that's hard. But it's where true insights emerge, through breakthrough innovation emerges.
All right. Awesome.
So, team here, so much first, please use it, but please quote me.
I will. We will surely quote you for sure.
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, Jean-Pierre, thank you so much for coming on our podcast, Navigating the Customer Experience, sharing about your organization, SLD, sharing about the 7 tenets in your book, ThinkBlink Manifesto, and just how organizations can really, as you mentioned, find a very emotive way to connect with their customers. As you mentioned, what stood out to me most in your conversation was, are you so connected to this brand that you'd actually get that brand tattooed on yourself? You want them to be diehard, loyal evangelists, that they will walk and spread good news about your business. And of course, there's no way that can happen if those interactions that they're having with your company are not ones that make them feel good, that create good feelings, good emotions. And I thought it was really, really great, the perspective that you brought to our show. And I hope that our listeners that tap into this episode will be able to take out some nuggets that they can take back into their organizations and make their business and experiences for their customers that much better. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and just a parting thought. You don't have to be big to be mighty. You don't have to be big to be mighty.
Agreed. All right. We just want to remind our listeners that you can join our private Facebook group, Navigating the Customer Experience Community, and follow us on X at NavigatingCX. Until next time, I'm your host, Yannick Grant.
Thanks for listening. For more awesome resources to take your customer service game to another level, head over to navigatingthecustomerexperience.com. See you next time.